a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Michelangelo. Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, or more commonly known by his first name Michelangelo, was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet of the High Renaissance born in the Republic of Florence, who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. Considered by some the greatest living artist during his lifetime, he has since been described as one of the greatest artists of all time. Despite making few forays beyond the arts, his artistic versatility was of such a high order that he is often considered a contender for the title of the archetypal Renaissance man, along with his rival, the fellow Florentine and client of the Medici, Leonardo da Vinci. A number of Michelangelo's works of painting, sculpture and architecture rank among the most famous in existence. His output in these fields was prodigious, given the sheer volume of surviving correspondence, sketches and reminiscences. He is the best documented artist of the 16th century. He sculpted two of his best-known works, the Pietà and David, before the age of 30. Despite holding a low opinion of painting, he also created two of the most influential frescoes in the history of Western art, the scenes from Genesis on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, and the Last Judgment on its altar wall. His design of the Florentine library pioneered Mannerist architecture. At the age of 74, he succeeded Antonio da San Gallo the Younger as the architect of St. Peter's Basilica. He transformed the plan so that the western end was finished to his design, as was the dome, with some modification. After his death, Michelangelo was the first Western artist whose biography was published while he was alive. In fact, two biographies were published during his lifetime. One of them, by Giorgio Vasari, proposed that Michelangelo's work transcended that of any artist living or dead, and was supreme in not one art alone, but in all three. In his lifetime, Michelangelo was often called Il Divino. His contemporaries often admired his terribilità, his ability to instill a sense of awe. Attempts by subsequent artists to imitate Michelangelo's impassioned, highly personal style resulted in Mannerism, the next major movement in Western art after the High Renaissance. Early life: 1475-1488. Michelangelo was born on 6 March 1475 in Caprese, known today as Caprese Michelangelo, situated in Val Tiberina, near Arezzo, Tuscany. For several generations, his family had been small-scale bankers in Florence. But the bank failed, and his father, Lodovico di Leonardo Buonarroti Simoni, briefly took a government post in Caprese, a small town situated in the Alpe di Catania area, where Michelangelo was born. At the time of Michelangelo's birth, his father was the town's judicial administrator and podesta, or local administrator of Chiasso della Verna. Michelangelo's mother was Francesca di Neri del Miniato di Siena. The Buonarrotis claimed to descend from the Countess Matilde of Canossa, a claim that remains unproven, but which Michelangelo believed. Several months after Michelangelo's birth, the family returned to Florence, where he was raised. During his mother's later prolonged illness, and after her death in 1481, Michelangelo lived with a nanny and her husband, a stonecutter, in the town of Settignano, where his father owned a marble quarry and a small farm. There he gained his love for marble, as Giorgio Vasari quotes him. Apprenticeships, 1488-1492. As a young boy, Michelangelo was sent to Florence to study grammar under the humanist Francesco da Urbino. However, he showed no interest in his schooling, preferring to copy paintings from churches and seek the company of other painters. The city of Florence was, at that time, Italy's greatest center of the arts and learning. Art was sponsored by the Signoria, the merchant guilds, and wealthy patrons such as the Medici and their banking associates. The Renaissance, a renewal of classical scholarship and the arts, had its first flowering in Florence. In the early 15th century, the architect Filippo Brunelleschi, having studied the remains of classical buildings in Rome, had created two churches, San Lorenzo's and Santo Spirito, which embodied the classical precepts. The sculptor Lorenzo Ghiberti had labored for 50 years to create the bronze doors of the baptistry, which Michelangelo was to describe as the gates of paradise. The exterior niches of the Church of San Michele contained a gallery of works by the most acclaimed sculptors of Florence, Donatello, Ghiberti, Andrea del Verrocchio, and Nanni di Banco. The interiors of the older churches were covered with frescoes, begun by Giotto and continued by Masaccio in the Brancacci Chapel, both of whose works Michelangelo studied and copied in drawings. During Michelangelo's childhood, a team of painters had been called from Florence to the Vatican to decorate the walls of the Sistine Chapel. Among them was Domenico Ghirlandaio, a master in fresco painting, perspective, figure drawing and portraiture who had the largest workshop in Florence. In 1488, at age 13, Michelangelo was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio. The next year, his father persuaded Ghirlandaio to pay Michelangelo as an artist, which was rare for someone of 14. When in 1489, Lorenzo de' Medici, de facto ruler of Florence, asked Ghirlandaio for his two best pupils, Ghirlandaio sent Michelangelo and Francesco Granacci. From 1490 to 1492, Michelangelo attended the Humanist Academy the Medici had founded along Neoplatonic lines. There his work and outlook were influenced by many of the most prominent philosophers and writers of the day, including Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Poliziano. At this time, Michelangelo sculpted the reliefs Madonna of the Steps and Battle of the Centaurs, the latter based on a theme suggested by Poliziano and commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici. Michelangelo worked for a time with the sculptor Bertoldo di Giovanni. When he was 17, another pupil, Pietro Torrigiano, struck him on the nose, causing the disfigurement that is conspicuous in the portraits of Michelangelo. Bologna, Florence, and Rome, 1492-1499. Lorenzo de' Medici's death on the 8th of April 1492 brought a reversal of Michelangelo's circumstances. Michelangelo left the security of the Medici court and returned to his father's house. In the following months he carved a polychrome wooden crucifix, as a gift to the prior of the Florentine Church of Santo Spirito, which had allowed him to do some anatomical studies of the corpses from the church's hospital. Between 1493 and 1494 he bought a block of marble, and carved a larger-than-life statue of Hercules, which was sent to France and subsequently disappeared sometime in the 18th century. On the 20th of January 1494, after heavy snowfalls, Lorenzo's heir, Piero de' Medici, commissioned a snow statue, and Michelangelo again entered the court of the Medici. In the same year, the Medici were expelled from Florence as the result of the rise of Savonarola. Michelangelo left the city before the end of the political upheaval, moving to Venice and then to Bologna. In Bologna, he was commissioned to carve several of the last small figures for the completion of the shrine of Saint Dominic, in the church dedicated to that saint. At this time Michelangelo studied the robust reliefs carved by Jacopo della Quercia around main portal of the Basilica of Saint Petronius, including the panel of the Creation of Eve, the composition of which was to reappear on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Towards the end of 1494, the political situation in Florence was calmer. The city, previously under threat from the French, was no longer in danger as Charles VIII had suffered defeats. Michelangelo returned to Florence, but received no commissions from the new city government under Savonarola. He returned to the employment of the Medici. During the half-year he spent in Florence, he worked on two small statues, a child Saint John the Baptist and a sleeping Cupid. According to Condivi, Lorenzo di Francesco de' Medici, for whom Michelangelo had sculpted Saint John the Baptist, asked that Michelangelo fix it so that it looked as if it had been buried, so he could send it to Rome, pass it off as an ancient work and sell it much better. Both Lorenzo and Michelangelo were unwittingly cheated out of the real value of the piece by a middleman. Cardinal Raffaele Riario, to whom Lorenzo had sold it, discovered that it was a fraud, but was so impressed by the quality of the sculpture that he invited the artist to Rome. This apparent success in selling his sculpture abroad as well as the conservative Florentine situation may have encouraged Michelangelo to accept the prelate's invitation. Michelangelo arrived in Rome the 25th of June 1496 at the age of 21. On the 4th of July of the same year, he began work on a commission for Cardinal Raffaele Riario, an over life-size statue of the Roman wine god Bacchus. Upon completion, the work was rejected by the cardinal, and subsequently entered the collection of the banker Jacopo Galli, for his garden. In November 1497, the French ambassador to the Holy See, Cardinal Jean de Bourges-Lagrolles, commissioned him to carve a Pieta, a sculpture showing the Virgin Mary grieving over the body of Jesus. The subject, which is not part of the biblical narrative of the crucifixion, was common in religious sculpture of medieval Northern Europe and would have been very familiar to the cardinal. The contract was agreed upon in August of the following year. Michelangelo was 24 at the time of its completion. It was soon to be regarded as one of the world's great masterpieces of sculpture, a revelation of all the potentialities and force of the art of sculpture. Contemporary opinion was summarized by Vasari: "It is certainly a miracle that a formless block of stone could ever have been reduced to a perfection that nature is scarcely able to create in the flesh." It is now located in St. Peter's Basilica, Florence, 1499-1505. Michelangelo returned to Florence in 1499. The Republic was changing after the fall of its leader, anti-Renaissance priest Girolamo Savonarola, who was executed in 1498, and the rise of the Gonfalonier Piero Soderini. Michelangelo was asked by the consuls of the Guild of Wool to complete an unfinished project begun 40 years earlier by Agostino di Duccio, a colossal statue of Carrara marble portraying David as a symbol of Florentine freedom, to be placed on the gable of Florence Cathedral. Michelangelo responded by completing his most famous work, the statue of David, in 1504. The masterwork definitively established his prominence as a sculptor of extraordinary technical skill and strength of symbolic imagination. A team of consultants, including Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci, was called together to decide upon its placement. Ultimately, the Piazza della Signoria, in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, it now stands in the Accademia, while a replica occupies its place in the square. With the completion of the David came another commission. In early 1504, Leonardo da Vinci had been commissioned to paint the Battle of Anghiara in the council chamber of the Palazzo Vecchio, depicting the battle between Florence and Milan in 1440. Michelangelo was then commissioned to paint the Battle of Cascina. The two paintings are very different. Leonardo depicts soldiers fighting on horseback, while Michelangelo has soldiers being ambushed as they bathe in the river. Neither work was completed and both were lost forever. When the chamber was refurbished, both works were much admired, and copies remain of them, Leonardo's work having been copied by Rubens, and Michelangelo's by Bastiano da Sangallo. Also during this period, Michelangelo was commissioned by Angelo Doni to paint a Holy Family as a present for his wife, Maddalena Strozzi. It is known as the Doni Tondo and hangs in the Uffizi Gallery in its original magnificent frame, which Michelangelo may have designed. He also may have painted the Madonna and Child with John the Baptist, known as the Manchester Madonna, and now in the National Gallery, London. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?